So good morning, Alfredo Perdiguero. Welcome to the Road Ahead podcast held at Penang Institute, Penang, Malaysia. We've met quite a few times before, and we're very happy to have you with us today to talk about ASEAN, the world situation, the American presidency, and whatever else you think are important at the moment for the ADB and so on. Yeah. So you are the head of the Regional Cooperation and Integration in the Southeast Asian Department of the Asian Development Bank. And you have worked in Southeast Asia for the last 25 years, and therefore has brought exposure, deep knowledge, and extensive work on regional cooperation and integration issues across the region, and within the context of ASEAN, of course. And also the Brunei, Darussalam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines East ASEAN Growth Area, so-called BIP-EGA. Yeah? And the Indonesian, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, which would include Penang itself, and the Greater Mekong Sub-region. You also act as the administrator of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund, the largest initiative in ASEAN history based on the member countries' funding contributions. You also lead the ADB partnership with Malaysia and Brunei Darussalam. So a very, very central player, really, in all the integrative processes that go on in ASEAN itself. So welcome very much to Penang Institute and to the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming. Now, are we actually in a new period in global geopolitics, given your long experience with such matters? And how do you think ASEAN's role is going to be? As you know, ASEAN's role has always been seen to be a little cautious, always wanting everyone to agree before anything happens. And that luxury, every now and then, seems a luxury. and nothing much happens because we have to make sure everyone's on board and so on. As the geopolitics get a bit tense, do you think ASEAN has that luxury still going forward, or does it have to come up with other ways of being proactive and impactful?
Well, I think you are absolutely correct. We are living very transformational and interesting moments, I think, in both the political and economic situation in the world. It's not only about the new American president, Mr. Trump, but it's also about what is happening in Europe. It's also what is happening in the Asia-Pacific region. And all this, of course, has influenced and will influence, actually, the situation in ASEAN. You are absolutely right. ASEAN has always has used a very cautious approach. And I think this approach is actually very appropriate for the times that we are living now.
I see.
It's very important to really do not panic, to observe what is the situation, and trying to react with care and with caution about what is happening. Basically, every day we are seeing announcements by the American president and by other leaders. This is definitely could have implications, but some of them they could simply be announcements that do not really translate into real policies. So I think it will be very important to observe and to, and of course to also to work together. I think this is another important area. One great advantage that ASEAN has is the centrality of ASEAN, something that has been used quite usefully by the ASEAN member states, but I think is now the time to even strengthen really the cooperation and the integration, because it's the time to be united, more united than ever, to really be able to react together towards all the different problems or challenges that could come from this very fastly moving situation.
I see. So be more united and continue to be cautious and don't react too quickly, because some of these statements do not become policy. They're just out there, maybe to distract, maybe to confuse, or whatever, right? Good advice, I think. Now, this year, as you know, is Malaysia's chairmanship year of ASEAN. So, based on that, I have two questions for you, I suppose. What do you think Malaysia can do that would be key for this coming year? Because this is also the first year of Trump, and we imagine that there will be a lot of changes, there will be tariffs that will hit, if not all of us, at least some countries more than others. And the second, since you've been in this line so long, if you compare what's needed of Malaysia this year, and if you compare that to the earlier times when Malaysia was chair, and you've been around 25 years in the area, so at least twice you have seen Malaysia being the chair as well. So this would be the third time. And at Penang Institute, you might have noticed as you come in that we have the ASEAN flag flying. It's not because of the conference downstairs. We've been flying it since January, just to mark to the Penang world, anyone crossing, that ASEAN is important. And as you know, in most countries in ASEAN, very strangely, their populations tend not to think very much about ASEAN. It's a leadership kind of association, isn't it? So, well, 2 or 3 questions baked in there.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important and really good that Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN this year. Prime Minister Anwar has always been, I think, a promoter of regional cooperation and integration. He has been as a well-respected leader, that has always trying to promote, I think, more integration, I think, within ASEAN, but also how ASEAN remains open and interconnect with the rest of the world also. So I think it's going to be a very interesting year, an important year for ASEAN, as you said. I think the motto of Malaysia of inclusivity and sustainability is a really good one. I think it's time to really do more on the sustainability agenda. And I see Malaysia and the other ASEAN member states are quite committed actually with this agenda of increasing sustainability. The ASEAN member states are actually some of the most affected countries in the world about climate change. So whatever happens in the world arena, and whatever commitments may happen or may not happen in the next maybe 4 years, especially, what is clear is that something else needs to be done about climate change, and this is very important agenda for ASEAN. So the idea of sustainability is important. Also, by the way, ASEAN is also starting to contribute more to carbon emissions. So that's also an important arena. Of course, they are latecomers into contributing to carbon emissions. The majority of the carbon emissions, they have been contributed by developed countries, and I think it's very important that developed countries also support whatever reforms ASEAN is doing. So I think ASEAN should continue insisting on this point while they themselves work together to reduce also the carbon emissions and to prepare themselves for anyway this climate change, the resilience, infrastructure, etc. There are many other areas in which I think the Prime Minister would like to promote ASEAN. Let me put an example. I think everyone is talking these days about developing the ASEAN power grid. This is a very important initiative that will allow interconnecting ASEAN countries more, so they can import and export electricity and energy, from one country to each other. This is very important because many countries like Singapore, they have commitments in place for reducing carbon emissions. They don't have the land, for example, and they need to import electricity from other countries. But it's not only Singapore, Malaysia, many other countries that they're still growing. There are countries that they can export electricity, like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and there's great potential. This is just one example of potential for greater collaboration. I think the issue of also digital connectivity is also very important in the agenda, and the countries are preparing, a new framework for that probably will be endorsed, hopefully, during this chairmanship of Malaysia, and I think this is again very timely. The digital world is changing super fast, and again there's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities, and that's why it's very important to work together on that. These are just 2 examples.
Right. So in the field of banking, for example, I hear that the Malaysians are actually quite interested in using banking and such mechanisms to integrate the whole region, aid trading and so on. Now, the ADB, I wonder about its role now in these changed times. How does it remain as non-partisan as possible now when the world seems to polarized in some sense. And of course, that's ASEAN's biggest challenge, to not allow itself to be too polarized. It's slightly polarized, one would say, in certain areas, but it's still holding together, right? How has the ADB's role changed over the years, do you think? And especially since you're in charge of the infrastructure part of it, can you say something about any plans that are in the works?
Yeah, well, actually, we are a non-political institution. We don't take sides from in politics. We basically focus on economic development. Poverty reduction still remains very high in our agenda. And very recently, we have declared ourselves as the climate change of the Asia-Pacific region. So actually, this is another area in which we are working, or trying to work even harder than we used to do. So we want to combine both, actually keep doing development for for the member states of the Asian Development Bank, but also to promote some of the regional and global agendas for climate change, both in adaptation and mitigation, both aspects. So we are expanding. One thing that we have done recently is to expand our resources significantly, because the countries, they really need and want the Asian Development Bank support on these agendas, and it's both the development agenda and the climate change agenda. Right. So we were able to really expand these resources. We are at the moment providing about $25 billion per year. We are also trying to actually see how can we catalyze more investments from the private sector into the development agenda and the climate change agenda. And both they are intertwined. Actually, we don't see the two agendas like competing agendas. We see that both are complementary. If we don't do enough for fight climate change, this will have negative implications in poverty. And you need also to work really with the poorest sections of communities for help them to prepare better for the climate change impacts. So at the moment, this is one of our priorities, and we think institutions like ours are very necessary at the moment. As you said, you clearly said there is some tensions, geopolitical tensions, geoeconomic tensions, and I think we are a very stable institution. We have been there for almost 60 years. Many different political trends have passed during these 60 years, but I think we have always remained a trusted partner for all our development member countries.
Yeah, thank you. Now, in this part of the world, Malaysia, it's a small country. It's not really a middle power. Sometimes, in some contexts, we say we might be a middle power, but I think, and it's right in the middle of ASEAN itself geographically, and it was one of the founding countries and so on. So for it to be chairman this year, I think sort of gives us an added importance to where ASEAN can go and what they can agree upon. So I'm wondering, one of the things that's important to a small country like Malaysia, or to an institution that's still developing like ASEAN, is the acceptance and the power of multilateralism, I think, right? And ASEAN, of course, is our local multilateral creation. But in recent times, you have a lot of acronyms thrown around now, right? We have always had APEC in a long time. ADB, another, But then in recent times, you have AUKUS, you have BRI, you have BRICS, which are not as non-partisan. They can't be seen as non-partisanly as perhaps people look at the ADB, right? Because they are not meant to be. And we here see it as a long-term challenge to the idea of multilateralism among smaller countries. And with Trump 2.0, I think everyone's a bit worried. Where will this go? How serious is the Trump administration in dismantling many older agreements that are the basis for a lot of our multilateral achievements, right? How do you see this legacy? Can it withstand? How much can it withstand of a full frontal Trumpist attack?
Well, I think first that this multilateralism and globalization has generally been a good thing, I would say, for the world, and this is especially true normally for smaller countries. Some things have not gone so well in some cases, and that's why I think there has been not paying sufficient attention to the people that were negatively affected by globalization and by multilateralism. That has and is having now some consequences that maybe we should have taken care of more. No, some people that were negatively affected or that were becoming in worse economically due to this opening up of the economies. But overall, if you look at that, looking back, I mean, having an open world and multilateral world is definitely something good, and it's something good especially for smaller countries sometimes, because a small country, if you need a country like Malaysia, with your population, even you are quite developed, you're an upper middle income country, probably soon to be a high income country. But despite of that, if you try to engage on your own with some of the big powers without engaging in multilateralism, you will not be in the best position to probably negotiate agreements or to get the best of that. So it is very important to associate with other countries that have also your interests. ASEAN obviously is the most obvious one, because you are already having you're quite a strong connection in ASEAN. So I think if you go as a bloc, as ASEAN, you will be the fourth or fifth economy in the world, and if you go together and you negotiate and participate in these negotiations, either trade negotiations or investment or even politically, that will be something very much better for Malaysia to do. And I think that clearly I see that seems to be the vision of Prime Minister Anwar with his leadership, coming into go and visiting different parts of the world. He has recently traveling to many different countries. I think he feels this is the interest not only of Malaysia, and of course that at his core, that's why he is the Prime Minister of Malaysia, but actually for the whole of ASEAN is something really good. In ADB, we are strong supporters of multilateralism. We are a multilateral institution,
of course.
And again, we believe that that works better than just going bilaterally.
I would agree with you on that point. My take also on Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's travels. He's been criticized domestically for traveling too much, but I think we are at a point nationally where our nation building has to involve region building. And back to my first comment and question earlier is that, do we still have the luxury of time, ASEAN? Can we move at whatever pace we are used to moving at? There's a certain urgency. There's a certain urgency in the world today. And I think Anwar Ibrahim traveling around trying to connect with as many countries as he can, and even trying to join BRICS and so on, it comes from a certain strategic approach, right? And I see that as quite hopeful. Yeah. And now I want to ask you, in line with ASEAN's cautious approach and so on, you have been involved in many, I would say, sub-regional initiatives or intra-ASEAN initiatives, like the BIMP, IGA, and GMS even, and IMT-GT, right? Do you see that as par for the course, or are these approaches a way to help to push ASEAN's integration along? Instead of always relying on 10 countries doing something, you do sub-regional initiatives. Do you see it that way, or is this just how, when things come to the operational level, it has to happen this way?
No, absolutely. I mean, we are in Asian Development Bank. We collaborate very closely. We are the development advisor of two of these sub-regional initiatives, very important, BMP-AGA and IMT-GT. Malaysia is a member of all those. In IMT-GT, Peninsular Malaysia is the member. And in BMP-AGA is actually Sabah and Sarawak, Labuan. They are the members of BMP-AGA. So why they were created? They were also created about 30 years ago. And the idea was like, it's easier to really work together when you are 3 or 4 countries. And also it's easier when the states are neighbors, and they have even some cultural linkages. I have friends and people which are like me on the other side of the border, so this is easier to actually work together. And also, some of the regions are a bit far away from the capital. The politicians in the capital may be too busy and not have enough time to really do the work and support. So that's what they were created. It was a good idea. One of them, by the way, I think Dr. Mahathir was the creator of that, and the inspiration came from him. So they continue working very well, and you're absolutely right. They see themselves as building blocks towards ASEAN integration, and what I mean by building blocks is there's two ways. Sometimes there's ideas, strategies that ASEAN actually create, but it's difficult to implement those strategies. So to implement them, you have these smaller groupings of countries that can go and accelerate the implementation of those in smaller groups. And this has been working very well in some areas. In other occasions, what happens is it's difficult to negotiate and to test something in ASEAN because 10 countries need to agree. Right. And consensus in ASEAN is very important, so you cannot move forward. But you can try first to experiment and to pilot some initiative at the sub-regional level, and this has happened in some cases. For example, in Borneo, Sabah, Sarawak, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, they test some time ago the movement of buses, that a bus can actually move without having to stop in every border. You can cross from one border to the other. This is a very interesting initiative, and ASEAN learned from this BMPAGA initiative, and they now try to apply this all over ASEAN. Right. The same could happen in things like the power interconnections that I mentioned before. Big negotiations will happen in ASEAN level, but you need to have concrete, specific pilot projects, and for that, sometimes the sub-regions are better equipped to really move forward.
What about China and this? I wonder, in your long experience working for ADB, and then in recent times, 25 years, if I go back, that's sort of when China's rise became obvious, right? So that this sort of is also your period working for the ADB. Can you say something about that process, that period? What is the relationship of ADB with Chinese authorities and Chinese initiatives, including the BRI? Has that changed over the 25 years you've worked with the ADB in the region?
Yeah, well, I think the transformation in the China economy has been absolutely impressive. I think the way they have been able to reduce poverty in the country and develop the country has been absolutely impressive. And there's no doubt the size of the Chinese economy is much, much bigger now than 25 years ago. So they are a much more important player. I think this is very important. Let me first refer maybe to ASEAN. They are a trading partner of ASEAN, a very important trading partner, an investor in ASEAN. So I think, and in Malaysia, and I think they cannot be definitely ignored. It is also very important. They will be under pressure now to really keep exporting, and they are exporting a lot at the moment to ASEAN. I think that relationship between ASEAN and China will have to be taken into consideration carefully, so there's not excessive flooding of Chinese products into ASEAN countries, especially if tariffs increase in the United States. There could be. So, but at the same time, the great potential, great investments coming from China. I think the Chinese are also in the process of really, keep investing outside. And there are great opportunities to work together with them. In ADB, we have a very good relations with China. It's a very important shareholder of the Asian Development Bank, but they're also still borrowing from ADB, and some people wonder why they worry, because they're quite developed. But the idea is, I think they value a lot still the great knowledge and good practices that the Asian Development Bank brings sometimes into the picture. So our program remains still somehow strong, probably slowly decreasing because China is also developing, but we remain helping in certain very specific areas, especially when related to climate change aspects and regional public goods. This is very important because the climate will also not improve if China do not take measures. And China is taking a lot of good measures, but they need sometimes extra help, and that's an area in which ADB, we remain still a good partner. That will be good for China, but it will be good for the whole region, for the whole world at the end of the day.
How I read it is that China is rising. It's 20, 30, 40 years now. And of course, it's in that way, it's still, despite being so big and so successful, it's still a newcomer where multilateralism is concerned and where international relations are concerned between big and small countries, between small and small countries, and so on. It's hard to not see that China is perhaps still a baby in certain areas like that. I don't know if I'm right on this. And of course, in certain areas, the ADB is the adult in the room, if I put it that way. And it doesn't surprise me that China then looks to you and see what can we learn from ADB. I wonder though, with China rising and its relationship in Northeast Asia and its relationship in Southeast Asia would strategically be different. And so I wonder, where ASEAN is concerned, what with China rising and the certain problems that come out of it, what do you see as the main challenges for ASEAN? Not only necessarily in relation to China, perhaps, but let's say the South China Sea, which is that definitely connected to China, or Myanmar, in some ways also connected to China. These are great challenges for ASEAN's integrity and so on. How does that worry the ADB, and what strategy do you have vis-a-vis these tensions?
Yeah, well, I think it's we don't focus, as I said, in political issues, but I think there's no doubt that political issues may influence, relationships. And as you said, the situation in Myanmar is a worrying situation. We are also quite worried about how the economy in Myanmar is developing. The issues in the South China Sea that could create certain tensions and have real negative impacts. We hope that ASEAN, both internally and in collaboration with China, will be able to solve whatever challenges happen there, because I think if you want to have economic stability, political stability is actually very, very important. And I would say that, except probably these two big issues, the ASEAN region is one of the most politically stable at the moment. Yes. I mean, there's at this very this world at the moment we are seeing a lot of political crisis, and even wars in many places of the world. This is not the situation here. So I think still situation could be manageable. It will require a lot of attention by the leaders, good leadership, to ensure that you keep that political stability in those two issues that you have mentioned. No? And that is also very important to negotiate well with China, also in their economic terms. So as I said, I think having cheap imports from China is very good for the consumers in Southeast Asia. They are benefiting, but also could have some negative impacts on developing your own industries if you don't carefully manage that relationship. But it could be a positive relationship, and it is already between China and Southeast Asia. Of course, also investment, attracting quality investment. Southeast Asia could also is one of the main beneficiaries, maybe, if of the trade war between China and the United States, and already some of the countries in the region, I think even Malaysia, Vietnam, they are already benefiting by the reallocation of some investments and industries from China into Southeast Asia.
Into Penang also.
Into Penang. And Penang is a very good example. I think that this diversification, and I think this is part of the strategy of your Prime Minister, I think is also, and here in Penang, is you of course have a lot of investment from the United States already and from other countries. Better not to put all the eggs in the same basket. So diversify your investment. This is a good thing in any case. So you want to keep friends of everyone. Yeah. You want to really trying to keep attracting high quality investment. And when I mean high quality, is not any kind of investment, but really upgrade yourself into the value chains. That's what actually will create real economic growth in Malaysia and in Penang.
Right. I think you're correct in that. That's one of our biggest challenge in Penang at the moment, when the world has suddenly become very interested in Malaysia and Penang. So it gives us a chance to use our filtering system as well. So central policies become important. Instead of just being at the whim of international investors, we have to pick and choose, I think, right? Now, Alfredo, I'm sorry, but I've been going at you from every angle possible, right? I have maybe only 2 or 3 more issues to take up with you. One is, well, the US tariffs. We don't know yet what's going to happen. So your advice, I think, at the moment is to just wait and see, yeah? So I won't push you on that point yet. It's too early in the day for people to have proper ideas about what to do, I think. But what you were saying earlier about ASEAN, I think it's, I don't know what the habit is. Maybe because of mass media, international mass media, we treat every challenge as a crisis, as if they're a crisis that has to be solved today, right? So Myanmar has it, how do we solve it today? South China Sea crisis, how do we solve it today? But as you say, outside of that, ASEAN's working fine, right? It's a growing region. Malaysia had over 5% growth last year. Doesn't look like a crisis, but when we go the mass media way, we tend to telescope all problems as if they have to be solved today. So a lot of issues, even the Taiwan issues, if you think it has to be solved today, then it is a problem. How do we? But the world doesn't work like that. You actually have time. Certain problems you put on the back burner, and so on and so forth, right? So that I like that point. Now, for integration of ASEAN itself, you're involved in infrastructure, and if it's nation building, we see immediately you want to build a nation, you build infrastructure. Not only roads, but everything else, even the internet and so on. Region building in ASEAN has, I think, been slightly weaker there because our 10 countries are also very different, and they're so divided up by the archipelago. So it's only certain areas where you have, well, sub-regional things going on, right? So what do you think of the infrastructure? It's an expensive thing always to build infrastructure. So you have national resources, you have regional resources, and then you have big power resources. Like with where China is involved, we have the BRI that seems to be focused in the beginning anyway, very much on the fact that national governments tend not to be able to build very good or fast infrastructure, and therefore the big power up north can provide that at a certain cost, of course. How do you, as ADB representative and economist, how do you see this? What are the traps? How real are the dangers involved in big power financing of national infrastructure?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think infrastructure is very important for economic development, economic growth. We have done several studies that have demonstrated, the link between having quality infrastructure in a country and in a region, and economic growth. And it's also very important if you want to attract foreign direct investment. The investors will look at what is the quality of your infrastructure. Is one of the important elements. So yes, it's very important. We calculated in ADB. We have calculated that about $210 billion will be required annually until 2030, for infrastructure in the region. That's a huge amount. Right. We are at the moment not investing in those amounts at all. Basically, a small percentage only of that. I think it's about 14 billion only. The majority of that money actually is coming from the public sector still. So we have not been able also to really mobilize sufficient resources from the private sector to invest into infrastructure. And the governments do not have the resources at the moment to actually do as much as is necessary to invest in infrastructure. Why not? Because they also had COVID. They're still recovering basically from COVID-19. They needed to put lots of resources to protect their own people, to protect the economy and firms, and they are starting to recover just now at the moment from that. So the fiscal space really to invest in infrastructure is not really so much. So it's very important really to do more and to attract more investment into that. There is a lot of money out there that could be brought into infrastructure. There are pension funds that have trillions of dollars. Right. There's insurance companies. There is the capital markets. All that is potential money that is waiting there to be utilized into infrastructure, and it's not yet happening. So more efforts needs to be done actually to attract this money. And you're right. You have to be very careful actually with what type of infrastructure you build. It could be also a white elephant project. It's a project that actually you build your infrastructure and is not properly utilized, is not used. We call it the infrastructure productivity. How much that infrastructure is utilized and how much real impact will have in improving economic growth. So you have to be careful. You should not allow that a power from outside or even a private investor comes and say, I would like to build this, let's build it. That's not the issue. It could have also negative implications.
Right.
Or especially if you borrow, and we have seen this by several countries, if you borrow excessively for an infrastructure project and there is not sufficient impact from that could really have very negative impacts. But I think overall, much more needs to be done in infrastructure. We need to keep bringing the private sector. We just need to be very careful which projects and for what, and have rigorous assessments financially, economically, environmentally, on what are the priority infrastructure projects in the region.
Right. For us in Penang and Malaysia, and for any academic who studies this region, the obvious infrastructure that should be built or should have been built is one that ties northern to southern Southeast Asia, as it were, and that would be good infrastructure going from Thailand down to Malaysia, down to Singapore, meaning, let's say, a high-speed railway that goes down. And so far, it's still on the planning stage, really, right? So that, to me, sort of signifies how difficult it is to build infrastructure within a region. You have to get countries for their finances to match and the timing to be right, and so on and so forth, right? So the problems are huge, and I suppose the ROI on infrastructure is a bit difficult, right? It's a bit difficult to count. It stretches over such a long period, and for democratic countries like Malaysia, it becomes, you tend to think more short term than long term, because you can't be investing millions and billions on something that will have an effect in 10 years' time. So politicians tend not to go into that. I suppose that's one thing hampering how something that obviously has to be built in the region itself.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's infrastructure requires long-term investment, and and actually that's why also banks, for example, are not so ready. There's a lot of risk, into going into building infrastructure projects. Something could go wrong, in resettling the people, in environmental assessment. There could be opposition to the projects. So there are difficult projects that requires a lot of leadership. And technical assessments, and you're absolutely right. Also, when these projects are regional, involve more than one country, the risk multiply by several times. This is why things like I have just mentioned, the ASEAN power grid, has not yet developed. They have been talking about that for more than 20 years, and it's not so easy. So it is now there is a momentum really to do so. There has to be a real need, and as I mentioned, the real need is let's bring more, let's trade, find ways to bring more energy, renewable energy somewhere, and bring these renewable energies in places where it can be produced, and bring it to other countries where it can where it can be consumed. That's what now it makes sense. So things needs to make economic and political sense, and trust is also very, very important. The same happened with the railways that you mentioned. Long time talking there, but not a lot of action. We are starting to see, I think, a bit more action. I mean, Thailand is quite serious, I think, now in developing the railways. We have seen some railways now. I took the railway the other day in Lao PDR, the Chinese railway, quite impressive. So things are starting to move. Again, you need certain per capita income. You need in the region, and you are getting there. You said it before. ASEAN is a region that is growing. I wouldn't define it's a region at crisis at all. No. It's a region that is growing at 4.8%. We calculate this year. Is still really very impressive. Of course, you have to be very alert about the multi-crisis that is happening around the world. You need to keep united. you need to keep it strong and keep the centrality of ASEAN. That will benefit the population, I think.
I would be interested to hear what you, with your long experience in ASEAN, what you think about maritime infrastructure. Now, looking at the region geographically, you would assume that the maritime infrastructure would be amazing, but it's not, right? It's very much territorial based, territory on land and so on. I was surprised. I remember when President Jokowi first came to power, and one of the first initiatives he had was to build a maritime infrastructure, building ports in Indonesia. And not knowing very much about Indonesia, I thought, don't you have that already? But then historically you look at it, yeah, you probably don't, because during colonial times, the British and the Dutch, they controlled the sea, so they probably over-controlled the sea, as it was. So once independence came, the maritime infrastructure was actually not that developed, right? Do you think going forward that would, for example, ADB, I don't know if governments in the region actually care very much about it, to build up a strong maritime infrastructure?
Yeah, this is a very, very important area also, and the majority of the trade really in ASEAN and in the world is actually happening through maritime connectivity.
Yes.
So actually, this is fundamental really for economic growth and for trade and for investment also. So having efficient ports that actually operate well, that they have enough, they have developed enough services and infrastructure is actually very important. And bringing again private sector investment into some of these ports, but also greening those ports. I mean, they're also an area in which we are doing quite a lot, in terms of making those ports greener, greening also shipping, the shipping airlines, actually that's also very important, making it more energy efficiency. I think that will also be a very important area in which we would like to work a lot. Many of the ports are still not very efficient. It takes a long time to really process the goods in the ports, and a lot of things needs to be done, not only to improve the infrastructure, but to link those ports to the railways, the multimodal transportation, for example. You also need to improve the processes within the ports. The single window for ports, for example, is something ASEAN has worked a lot on single windows, but this is not working very well yet in the ports, the port single window. And also consolidation of ports, I think, is actually very important. On one side, you need to really keep developing smaller ports because you have poor areas, very isolated, that if they don't have a port, they will not have the possibility to develop. On one side, that's important. But you also need to pay attention to some of your bigger and most important ports, because it's a very competitive area, and only the bigger ports are able to create the critical mass somehow to compete out there. So you need to do both at the same time, and this is not easy. But I totally agree that this is an area in which much more needs to be done. In the Asian Development Bank, we are now launching new initiatives and trying to develop more. In fact, we are in conversations with Indonesia, for example, on how to develop some of the ports, maybe, and to see if that will be possible. And also greening shipping. The shipping is also very important.
Right. I tend to think, looking at especially Malaysia, that we care so much about infrastructure on land, connecting towns and so on, when this is an archipelago. So so we do have a colonial legacy of thinking too much about the land, because the seas were controlled by others, I suppose. Right? Now, I've kept you a long time, Alfredo. May I end with just one last question about BRICS? The fact that Indonesia, the largest ASEAN country, is now a member of BRICS, and Thailand and Malaysia are partners, meaning they want to get in. Do you at all see that as a challenge to ASEAN itself? Is this another layer of multilateralism that will divide ASEAN in the long run, or not at all?
No, I don't think this will divide ASEAN. I think ASEAN relation is very, very consolidated. I mean, you are almost 60 years institution already. I think the interests that ASEAN member states have are very common. You are really neighbors to each other. I think you cannot afford really to weaken your relationship. Creating new partnerships and new alliances, outside of that, is something that I imagine many ASEAN member states would like to do. BRICS has been an option, is an option. By the way, the interests of the different BRICS countries are not yet, I would say, so well aligned to each other. So that's something that is to be seen on what will be the real impact really of the BRICS. But I think every country has the right really to go outside and trying to look, and as I said before, diversify their partnerships in this world in which, as we said at the beginning, multilateralism is still important. So you want to make as many friends as possible there. But no, I think ASEAN is here to stay, is here to become stronger, and is more necessary than ever. And what I hope is, and I'm very sure under your chairmanship, Malaysia chairmanship this year, I think it will be a good moment to really strengthen this even further.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you, Alfredo, for taking the time. It's been very interesting. I've been picking your brains in every way I can. I hope to do this again sometime in the near future.
Yeah.
And welcome to Penang again, and enjoy the rest of your stay.
Has been a pleasure for me, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.